All right. Well, we are very happy to welcome Kamyar Enshayan tonight. Kamyar is the director of the University of Northern Iowa's Center for Energy and Environmental Education, or otherwise known as CEEE. CEEE's mission statement is to empower Iowans with the knowledge, experiences, tools, and inspiration needed to create a sustainable future for our communities. Kamyar has a big job at UNI, but he is a man of many hats. Kamyar was a strong local foods advocate before the term locavore was ever popular. He is a mechanical engineer with a graduate training in agriculture, climatology, and solar energy. Kamyar has developed several community-wide programs, including a local chapter of Buy Fresh, Buy Local, as well as Yards for Kids, which is a health education program aimed at reducing the use of lawn weed killers and significantly reducing children's exposure to these toxins at schools, parks, and homes. Kamyar is also a member of the Cedar Falls City Council. Please welcome Kamyar Enshayan.
Thanks so much. I'm just delighted to be here, and just hearing what Heather described is just, it's like the best thing. After you hear, you listen to the news, egg recalls and manure spills and things like that. It's like, and then you hear this and you're saying, wow. and it really is fantastic, and it's the best thing. I don't think there's anything better to do than to feed our children good food. I'm just so impressed that there's so many wonderful work going on across Iowa. We kind of, in terms of my involvement in Farm to School, really grew out of our work with a lot of farmers in our metro area, and we were staying away from Farm to School because our staff were very limited. We always had funding problems. We just kept working with grocers and nursing homes and restaurants, and we felt like schools are really way too complicated, and they are. And we just didn't feel like it was in our league to start working with schools, and we always felt like it really had to come from parents. It had to be really from the key stakeholders, food service directors, and then we would be involved. And really that's how we kind of got involved in our part of Iowa. And my role has been mostly kind of as a cheerleader, fundraiser, a little bit of organizing and things like that. Really, the day-to-day work of it has been done by our staff and really the people in the schools. We've been just mostly facilitating. So, and really the work, we started working with Price Lab. Price Lab, how colleges of agriculture have experimental farms. Well, colleges of education used to have experimental schools. They were called lab schools. And most colleges of education closed their lab schools. UNI is one of the few that kept their lab school, and actually now it's kind of back on kind of a trendy thing to have a lab school around the country. A few colleges of education are getting it back. Anyway, the way we ended up, let's see, how do I make this? There we go. So these are some images that were taken by parents at Price Lab of 4 different meals last year, or the year before last year. So it was in spring of 2009. And this is just incredible. All the packaging, everything basically processed, high fat, high sugar, everything. And then on top of that, basically the way we got into this, I got a call from one of the parents who discovered that there were a bunch of recalled beef. You remember January of 2007, I believe, where there was a largest beef recall, and Iowa was one of the largest recipients of the recalled beef, and so they were really upset about that why was even there. Of course, they had gotten rid of it, but and so they asked me. We went to the school. We sat with the parents and teachers and school officials, and And they all said, yeah, let's do something. And one of the parents stepped forward saying, okay, I have a little bit of food service experience. I volunteer to help with this. And it turned out the school was ending their contract. They had outsourced the whole kitchen facility. And again, they were lucky that school had a wonderful kitchen with all the tools, all the equipment, except they were never used for years. And so anyway, so they hired Rob Stanley, who's not in this photo, and Jackie, who basically, had a huge task ahead of them. This is starting August of 2009. Okay, so last school year, it was the first year, and they started with a plan, with goals. Well, I should back up. Once we have it took a year or so. Once we had the go-ahead, we went to the Kellogg Foundation. We got about $40,000 from the Kellogg Foundation. We raised about $20,000 locally. So we had about $60,000 to go to the school and say, okay, let's hire a brand new food service director. Let's get going. So they basically scrapped everything they had in the past, canceled their contract, and started completely from scratch, which is different than in most situations. And this was the goal that they developed. And this is kind of the template for their menu. They had a meat entree, they always had a vegetarian entree, they had fruit, sometimes they had fruit, and they had fruit dessert, but they've eliminated all desserts. And you can see the prices. That's how it was last year. And anyway, all of these things, they added an a la carte option. This was the October menu for 2009, it featured grass-fed beef. It featured local dairy, a whole lot of, about 8 or so local fruit and vegetable growers. Just wonderful. They just did a great job. And now, that's how the meal starts, compared to this. So, which of course, that means a lot more labor. There's a lot of issues that, Diane knows about. But nonetheless, a lot of meals are still prepared from scratch, which is a major commitment. But again, what else is there to do? What is better to do than feed good food to our kids? So again, fresh vegetables. These are scenes from Price Lab. And this is what it looks like in the end. And kids, we've done surveys of faculty and students and parents, and it's just unanimous, like everybody loves it. And they're just so impressed. Just before the school started, we did one kind of a small, like a focus group, and this was the meal. And we actually had quite a few kids come and check it out. And this is a typical day at Price Lab. Last year, again, a lot of local apples, high school kids serve. The thing is, this is a school of 450 people, 450 kids, okay, K through 12. It's not a huge school district. So I can imagine, though we're working on later, we'll tell you a few other schools we're working with. So it was, there were, though a lot of small rural schools fit the category of Price Lab in terms of numbers. These are just images we've taken from Price Lab Kitchen. Again, local dairy, a lot of things cooked from scratch. And the other key feature was we hired a gardener who involved the first graders and second graders in planning and just building a garden, and then this is a workshop that we held last April that about 50 or 60 food service directors from all over Iowa came to Price Lab and exchanged ideas. It was just wonderful. high school. Students built a wonderful compost facility at the garden. So everybody's engaged in it. It really, and all, Heather mentioned the key kind of goal is to involve the kids and let them know where the food comes from. So that is a big component of what Price Lab is doing. So by December of last year, here are some of the things the changes that we had seen. The year before, they served 23 breakfasts a day. Until December, it had gone up. Student lunches, more than doubled. I mean, just all of a sudden, a lot more people came. And you can see hardly any faculty would go and eat down there. Now, again, this is only from August through December. And you can see in terms of nutrition, they offered basically fresh fruits every day, not just canned, nothing canned. Let's see, cooking from scratch, local vendors. By December, they had already bought $21,000 worth of local food. One of the other interesting things was waste reduction, where there was so little packaging. They had just the size of all these milk cartons and all this packaging were much reduced. Okay, now this is an interesting. I want to kind of. I'm sorry that I couldn't get the computer to make these numbers bigger, but this is very important, which is, other school districts want to know, okay, you did all of this, but how much did it cost? And we're still trying to figure all of this out. The best numbers I've come up with, this is based on actual records of the school. This is incredible. Last year, the year before, in 2008-09, this school of 450 kids spent $113,000 to have the kind of food that you saw. Okay? That's a loss. Okay? Now, last year, once you include all of the expenses, so you can see that 09 and 10, you'll see the loss was reduced by 30,000. And so last year's expense was only 82,000. In other words, the cost of running a fantastic lunch program for a school of 450 kids was 82,000. Now, so I called, Diane, it would be very interesting to know. It's an interesting number. I've been curious, okay, what does it take? What's the out-of-pocket expense of a school district to run an excellent lunch program? Now remember, this is just the second year. The staff are still learning, fine-tuning, and that number could come down. So I called one of my friends who runs the Independence Community School, and I'm going to talk about them, what they're doing. And so it took a while for her to kind of get all the numbers to say, okay, this is total income, total expenses. And her school district is much larger, though it's not huge. It's not like the size of Iowa City. And theirs was, the net was 45,000. So, and they've